Dear colleagues, it is June 16th, 113th day of Russia's full-scale invasion against Ukraine. We're at Media Center Ukraine. My name is Natalia Staroprava. We'll start with a presentation of the digital Ecodozor EcoWatch platform. We have with us Henrik Villadsen, Ambassador and OSCE Project Co-ordinator in Ukraine. I will now give the floor to the ambassador, and the first question is to you, Sa. Why is the ecological situation in Ukraine in the focus of OSCE's attention?
Hello to everyone, online and offline, as we say. Thank you very much for the question. The OSCE has always been about the environment as one of our main priorities. We have about 6 of them: political, military matters, environment and economy, and the rule of law and human rights. So environment is a classic OSCE area. And the situation in Ukraine at the moment, I think, is probably the best example in the world about why the OSCE should stay engaged in the environment. For several years, the environment has been a big issue in Ukraine, more in the east of the country than elsewhere, but with a war that tragically broke out in February this year, this problem has exploded. It is a much bigger problem than it was, and it was a big enough problem before. So therefore, we have decided quite a while ago that in the future work of the OSCE in Ukraine, the environment must be one of the very big priorities. Let me just say a few words about what we're doing today and at this meeting today. But let me begin with the beginning. In normal times, I would say that it's a great pleasure for me to be with you on an occasion such as this, where we are presenting important findings from one of our projects. However, with the war that was tragically, wrongly and illegally started by the Russian Federation in Ukraine, nothing can be said to be a good occasion these days. In the tragedy and the criminal acts that are unfolding every day, with very tragic consequences for Ukraine and its people, but not only that, also for the whole world. I will therefore start with expressing my greatest sympathy, my sincerest sympathy to those of you who've lost your loved ones and your close ones over these last months. And I do hope that the rest of the world will be in a position to do more to help Ukraine overcome the many challenges that the country faces now. As you kindly mentioned, yes, I'm the OSCE ambassador. I'm the OSCE Project Co-ordinator in Ukraine, as we call it. The office has been working in Ukraine for almost 23 years now, and I've been here myself for about 3.5 years at this point in time. Since the end of March, our sister organization in the country, the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission, its mandate expired and was not extended, and therefore our office, we are the only OSCE organization on the ground in Ukraine right now. We never stopped our work in Ukraine, and we are making plans for its continuation. The way that we work is that we always work with the Ukrainian government. We deliver project assistance to the government and helping the government meet its commitments that it has given in the OSCE framework, and in that way to overcome a lot of challenges. We've been addressing many different areas, everything from democratic governance, rule of law, and even what we can call harder security matters, assisting the Ministry of Defense in a number of things. The war, unfortunately, made a number of things we are working on even more urgent than they were before, and including, as I mentioned before, and thank you again for the question, the issues of environmental security, clearly heightened priorities at this point in time. Of course, in these tragic days, we think first of all about the people whose lives are in immediate danger from the ongoing acts of war, the hostilities. But we shouldn't forget that the environmental damage that's being faced in many parts of the country will have long-term effects on the health and the lives of everyone who lives not only in the directly affected areas, but also beyond these areas. The Ecodozor platform that we are to present today is one of the outcomes of our cooperation with the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources. In cooperation with the international network Zoï, we have been able to accumulate data on incidents with a range of environmental risks. This is, of course, at this stage a preliminary set of data, and I'm sad to say we still need to continue the work to add information about new damages and new disruptions, environmental disruptions from the ongoing hostilities, which actually makes many of the areas where we would like to analyze data and so on and gather information inaccessible simply because it's too dangerous to go there right now. But the collection of information that we already have paints a grim picture, some of which we'll see today. This work of ours, it is based on expertise that we have already accumulated while working to assess environmental damage in Donbass inflicted by the hostilities since 2014. So it was already some years ago that I was able to say that this problem is significant, and my words were supplemented by research that outlined a number of areas of further concern. We also proposed a number of policy recommendations, how we could mitigate the effects of environmental damage. I am soon finished, don't worry, I will not talk all day. We proposed a number of policy recommendations to mitigate the damages. Now, with the war and this full-scale mode that it's in, we can speak of a totally new dimension of challenges ahead. I think that cannot be said enough. It was bad enough as it was before. Now it's much worse. I believe sort of in seeing things with my own eyes, and in these last few weeks I've visited a number of regions in Ukraine that have been heavily affected by the war, including Chernihiv and the areas near Kiev, Makariv, Bodyanka, Bucha, and Irpin, where I was just yesterday. It's a quite striking sight to see the destruction, and it's unfortunately a terrible illustration of human suffering. But it also highlights how much will need to be done to repair the damage that has taken place. It's also an urgent need to address environmental problems in these areas, and this undoubtedly will go hand in hand with destroyed infrastructure and destroyed enterprises. This needs to be taken into account already in the planning and the accumulation and allocation of resources for assistance in the post-war reconstruction of Ukraine. That will be the next phase, and we have to think about that already now. But first we need peace, of course. When I speak about assistance, in conclusion, I should also stress that my office is, of course, ready to do its part and continue to do its part, especially in the areas where emergency response is required, chemical security, water monitoring, where we've already done a lot and we will continue to do much more. We are ready to continue supporting Ukraine in these and other spheres, and with this said, I'll hand the floor back to you to introduce the next speakers, and let me just finish with saying Slava Ukraina.
Героям слава, дякуємо. А я запрошую до слова
Heroyam Slava, thank you, and I would like to give the floor to Alla Yushchuk, manager of environment projects at OSCE. First question, could you tell us more about this digital platform, the Ecodozor, how it will function and what use it will be to the ordinary Ukrainian? Thank you. Hello to everyone, to all who are with us here and to all who are watching online. First of all, I'd like to thank the media representatives for the difficult and important work you're doing at this difficult time. I would like to start by saying that the question of environmental damage in wartime and in hostilities, the understanding of this damage is being currently rethought. And whereas a few years ago the question of environment and war were treated as secondary in terms of humanitarian law, uh, today increasing numbers of international organizations are actively promoting the topic of environmental protection during hostilities. This includes looking for finding effective mechanisms of international law, finding proper tools for analyzing the damage during and after combat and hostilities. Another strategic direction is even um, a greener army. Um, in the past 8 years since the start of combat in the east of Ukraine, our coordinator events did an estimate of, did an assessment of the environmental damage. We had analytical materials prepared. We also proposed, developed a methodology for collecting information, and we also did an in-depth study of dangerous enterprises that constitute serious risk for industrial Donbass. All of these materials are available on our website. They are they remain relevant today. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, the situation changed both in terms of the extent of the impact and of the nature of this impact. For instance, the number of incidences that have occurred at dangerous industrial objects of industry in the past 100 days now equals the number that we'd had in the first 8 years prior, since the very start of the war in the eastern Ukraine. So we're talking about massive scales. Moreover, we see missile strikes that destroy various localities and settlements, that destroy residential infrastructure and other infrastructure, that a large number of construction rubble um, is supplemented by the amount of military technology that will require further steps to safely remove and recycle. Moreover, radiation objects that are radiation risks are being seized, and there are uncontrolled activities on their territories. These present significant threats in terms of radiation security. Of course, we observe the damage to ecosystem, the chemical pollution of soil and water. Of course, all of these are consequences that will have long-term. These are long-term consequences, not only for the environment, but also the health of the population and the social economic well-being. The assessment of damage during hostilities is complicated for a number of reasons. Firstly, there's the impossibility to physically study things during the active phase of the hostilities, which is also a reason for that prevents us from timely stating the pollution. Secondly, it's difficult to establish cause and effect. For instance, when the consequences of the war may be viewed as can be seen as particular as something that was there prior to the war, or natural factors. For this reason, and of course, this affects the way this data and information is presented, including into international legal institutions. Often, another reason for difficulty is the lack, or is the complete lack or partial lack of data, and so we're talking about basic data for comparison. For this reason, the data collection and aggregation and analysis is the most critical for the further assessment of the environmental impact of the hostilities. The Ecodozor EcoWatch information platform that we present today is the result of our experience of working that had started back in eastern Ukraine back in 2014. This platform was created together with the Swiss ecological Zoï network, which has been a valuable partner to us in doing this project work for ecological security. The idea of the platform is that is to create a database with aggregate data about the environmental conditions and present them cartographically. A lot of this information has to do with violations, with official or unofficial reports from various objects that have been damaged because of hostilities and that may present environmental risks. We see in the modern world the information is spread in new ways and new forms, and for this reason social networks and social channels often become a powerful and reliable sources of information that allow us determine the problem, define the problem, spread awareness of the problem, and control. Sorry, I wanted to clarify how exactly will this database be supplemented. Thank you for that. Let me switch to the actual platform. The platform is, of course, online, freely available. It can be found at ecodozor.org. The platform is very convenient. It has a very convenient interface. It has several chapters or several links, damaged objects of the various branches of industry. It has a chapter or section dedicated to the damage to these objects. Another section pertains to the damage of localities and residential places, and there's another place with fires, with the place where fires arose, which will have more information about the area and types of a landscape affected. And the final section that the system has at the moment is this kind of integrated assessment of the ecological risk by number of violations and the level of threat or risk. I would like to state that the system is right now being developed. It will be supplemented with other data, with new data, particularly the data about the network of posts, of checkpoints, the state of water and air. There will be also the possibility to generate an automatic report, which will allow us to trace the trends and the dynamics. And there will also be a module with a library of readings, which we also hope that the system will be supplemented with other chapters or other sections that will be developed as information grows. This platform may be useful for journalists, for scholars, for researchers, activists, and of course ordinary citizens. And it is also convenient for presenting certain clear analytics, simple and clear analytics. Here's an example of this kind of primary analytics in the 3 months of the war on the basis of the data that we have in the system will be demonstrated by our colleague Dmytro Averin, the next speaker, and he may also give you more details about how this data was collected and aggregated. Thank you, Paniela. Please stay with us. And we also have with us Dmytro Averin, expert of the ecological projects of the coordinator of the OSCE. Panas Dmytro, could you tell us why this project matters now? Hello, colleagues. The reason this project matters is that we started our work on this project almost immediately from the start of the war in Ukraine. This is important because we collected a serious basis of information that will be used by Ukraine to assess the ecological damage caused by the aggression of the Russian Federation. This may then be used to assess this damage, to calculate this damage in terms of in monetary terms, in order to understand the sum, the numbers of the sum of damages that Ukraine has suffered. As for the statistics we've collected, these statistics have to do pertain to the period from February 24th to this early June. I would like to say that in Ukraine, as a developed region, military action, of course, presents serious ecological threat. The damage to infrastructure, to production and industry, the the storage of industry, liquid waste and sewage, which there's a lot of which in Ukraine, particularly in the east, which is of course directly affected by current hostilities. These instances of damage or violation can be the source of ecological disaster, catastrophe. Over the period, could you please switch to the first slide? The first slide is the slide with risks. Next. Yeah. Over the period of our research, we've seen over 1,200 reports about the damage of various localities in Ukraine. How do we note these violations? Obviously, we don't always have the opportunity to see it with our own eyes, and obviously we have to use some other methods. For instance, open source or reports of the Ukrainian General Staff or the local authorities, etc. We note and put all of these instances into our database, and then we work with them. These instances of damage in various localities in Ukraine present ecological threat, and they expel pollutants into the atmosphere, for instance, from fires, from the burning of the ammunition, to the pollution of waters, the water table, of soils, even the destruction of the landscape, also the creation of significant amounts of construction rubble and potentially dangerous waste. As far as the statistics, the number of violation and damage since February and March has been going down because, of course, Zhytomyr, Kyiv, and Chernihiv and part of Kharkiv regions have been liberated. Whereas in March, this number was about 400 to 500 reports per week. Now we're down to about 300. The largest number of violations and instances are in eastern Ukraine, in the cities like Mariupol, Kharkiv, Severodonetsk, Rubizhne, Popasna, Avdiivka. The majority of these reports have to do with the damage, to the destruction of the infrastructure. We're talking about almost 78% of all the reports we've had. As far as the reports about lack of resources, almost half are have to do with electricity, almost a third have to do with water. Next slide, please. Over this period, we've also studied the effect of hostilities on industries and infrastructural objects. We've noted over 580 reports of violations or emergencies at various enterprises that have to do with hostilities in Ukraine. And obviously, these violations create long-term threats for the population and for the environment all over Ukraine, and even in the territory of neighboring countries. The number of instances has also gone down slightly over this period. By late February, early March, we had about 60, 70 reports per week. Now we're looking at about 10 to 20 reports per week. Most affected are places like Azovstal, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. We've had the most reports of violations there. The Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, the Avdiivka chemical plant, etc. So these are extremely dangerous industrial enterprises. So, for instance, as far as Azovstal is concerned, we note 43 reports of various work disruptions or infrastructure destruction. I have to say that, for instance, in Azovstal, which was during its design prior to the Second World War, a decision had been made to separate part of the water of the Azov Sea with a dam. So there's a significant storage with significant sewage storage. If this dam had been damaged, this would be a serious problem for the Azov Sea and also the Black Sea. Sorry, could we? Can I just ask how is it possible to assess the real condition of damage in places, in inaccessible places like Mariupol? Unfortunately, without seeing these enterprises, it's impossible to determine the damage monetarily, because we need live studies. We need going out to these places. We need to take samples. We have the tools when this can be done at a distance, for instance, using satellite data imagery of various quality, but this has to do less with enterprises. It has more to do with assessing damage from fires or the damage to nature preserves and natural parks. Although assessing the fires at various industrial enterprises are possible through satellite images, but numerically it's very difficult to calculate this damage right now. So we will need additional studies. So we focused now on collecting information that will then serve as the basis for assessing the damage. Can we look at the next slide? I will just I will say a few words about the risks that arise because of the hostilities, briefly if possible. Okay, I'll try. So we've seen 360 objects of critical infrastructures that have been damaged. Among these are the most ecologically dangerous, like nuclear power plants, water electric stations, and metallurgical plants, various seaports, oil storage facilities, etc. Over 40% of the objects that have been affected have to do with heavy industry. As far as numbers are concerned, the metallurgy and processing are 22 objects. Chemical, we have over 30 objects of chemical industry. Mining, about 24 objects, about 11 objects of heat and energy. Various airports, about food industry, about 40 objects. A quarter of these objects that have been damaged because of Russia's aggression present a high and very high levels of ecological risk. These are heavy industry and energy. Perhaps a question for all of us: how do international organizations in Ukraine help in resolving the ecological problem in Ukraine? Well, international organizations today we're presenting a tool that we've developed together with a governmental partner, the Ministry for the Protection of the Environment. This is the first step to assess and note these violations, to understand after the war is over, it'll be possible to note the territories where further research, more deepened research ought to be done, because field trips and assessment of the damage is a very important process. So now in collecting and aggregating this data, the government is forming a picture of where we've had the highest ecological risks, and in future we'll be able to plan steps towards renewal and repair. We're working together with our international partners, helping them address the situation to the extent that it's possible in these conditions. Thank you. With us have been Henrik Villadsen, coordinator of the OSCE projects in Ukraine, Alla Yushchuk, project manager, coordinator of the OSCE project, and Dmytro Averin, expert of environmental projects at OSCE Project Co-ordinator in Ukraine. Our next briefing will start at 1 p.m. with Natalia Humaniuk, head of the